Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Today we will talk about one of the time's greatest philosophers, Plato, a towering figure of Western philosophy, profoundly influenced the intellectual traditions of humanity. Born in ancient Athens, he was a disciple of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, forming a philosophical triad that shaped centuries of thought. His legacy, from his ideas to his academy, resonates even today. Part 1. The Birth of a Philosopher. Plato was born in 427 BCE in the ancient city of Athens, Greece, during a period of immense cultural and political activity. His family belonged to the aristocracy, with deep political connections on both sides. His father, Aristotle, was said to have descended from Codrus, the last legendary king of Athens, while his mother, Pyrrhiction, was related to the famous lawmaker Solon. This illustrious heritage provided Plato with a sense of pride and responsibility, but also an early exposure to the complexities of governance and social order. His birth name, Aristocles, was eventually replaced with the nickname Plato, a term often associated with the Greek word for broad. Some sources suggest this referred to his physical stature or broad shoulders, while others believe it symbolized the breadth of his intellect or eloquence in speech. Plato was the youngest of 3 brothers and had a sister, which placed him in a dynamic household where discussions on politics and philosophy were likely commonplace. Athens, where Plato was born, was at the height of its power and prestige. The city-state was celebrated for its advancements in democracy, art, literature, and philosophy. However, it was also a time of turbulence, marked by the long and brutal Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. This backdrop of conflict and shifting power dynamics would significantly shape Plato's worldview. As a child, he witnessed the decline of Athenian glory, the fragility of democratic systems, and the consequences of political instability. Plato's early education reflected the values of Athens' elite. He likely studied grammar, music, gymnastics, and rhetoric, all essential components of a well-rounded education in ancient Greece. These subjects were designed not only to cultivate knowledge but also to prepare young men for leadership and civic life. It is said that Plato showed remarkable intelligence and creativity from an early age, excelling in poetry and drama before turning his attention to philosophy. The death of his father, Aristotle, during Plato's youth brought significant changes to his life. His mother remarried a man named Pyrilampus, a prominent figure in Athenian politics. This introduced Plato to influential political circles, further exposing him to the intricacies of governance and diplomacy. These early experiences likely planted the seeds of curiosity that would later grow into his deep exploration of justice, politics, and society. Despite his aristocratic background, Plato did not confine himself to a life of privilege. The intellectual environment of Athens was vibrant, with figures like Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras influencing the city's philosophical discourse. Plato's exposure to these ideas, combined with his familial connections and education, created the foundation for his future as a thinker. Plato's birth and upbringing in Athens laid the groundwork for his intellectual journey. It connected him to the cultural and political pulse of his city while exposing him to its flaws. These formative years, shaped by privilege, loss, and exposure to conflicting ideologies, would guide him on a path to becoming one of the most influential philosophers in history. Part 2. Athens in Plato's youth. Plato's youth unfolded in a city of contradictions, where unparalleled cultural achievements coexisted with political turmoil. Athens, at the time, was at the height of its intellectual and artistic influence, renowned as the cradle of democracy. Yet, this golden age was marred by the ongoing Peloponnesian War, a devastating conflict between Athens and its rival, Sparta. The war, which lasted from 431 to 404 BCE, deeply impacted the city and its citizens. Athens initially thrived, showcasing its naval dominance and cultural supremacy. However, the tides turned with the outbreak of a devastating plague that claimed tens of thousands of lives, including that of Pericles, the city's revered leader. The loss of Pericles and the weakening of Athenian morale brought instability and disillusionment, particularly among the younger generation, including Plato. As a member of the aristocracy, Plato was privy to the challenges faced by Athens during this period. He would have observed the city's attempts to recover from the plague, rebuild its defenses, and maintain its democratic ideals. However, Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War was a turning point. In 404 BCE, Sparta imposed harsh terms on Athens, dismantling its democracy and installing the oligarchic regime of the 30 Tyrants. The 30 Tyrants, led by Critias, who was notably related to Plato, ushered in a reign of terror. Their authoritarian rule was marked by violence, property confiscations, and political purges. Although Critias was a family member, Plato found himself disillusioned with the regime's brutal tactics, further shaping his skepticism toward both oligarchy and democracy. This disillusionment was compounded by the restoration of democracy in 403 BCE, which, though welcomed by many, brought its own set of challenges. Athenian democracy's flaws became increasingly evident to Plato, particularly in its susceptibility to demagoguery, factionalism, and mob rule. These flaws would later become central to his philosophical inquiries into governance and justice. During this turbulent period, Athens remained a hub of intellectual activity. Philosophers, dramatists, and orators gathered in public spaces like the Agora to debate ideas, share stories, and challenge conventional wisdom. It was in this vibrant environment that young Plato likely began to explore questions about ethics, politics, and human nature. The influence of figures like Heraclitus, with his ideas about change, and Parmenides, with his emphasis on permanence, would have sparked the curiosity that later defined Plato's work. Athens' decline also fueled debates about the role of leadership and governance. Plato, deeply affected by the city's struggles, started questioning the ability of both democracy and oligarchy to create a just society. These questions would form the foundation of his later works, particularly the Republic, where he sought to envision an ideal state. Despite the chaos of war and political instability, Athens' cultural achievements endured. Playwrights like Euripides and Sophocles were creating timeless works, while sculptors and architects adorned the city with masterpieces. Plato, as a young man, absorbed the richness of this culture, even as he grappled with the city's imperfections. His aristocratic upbringing allowed him to engage with these cultural treasures while also exposing him to the fragility of human institutions. Plato's youth in Athens was thus a period of contradiction and complexity. It was an era that blended the heights of human achievement with the depths of human suffering. These experiences shaped Plato's philosophical outlook, grounding his idealism in a profound awareness of the imperfections of the real world. Part 3. Meeting Socrates. Plato's encounter with Socrates marked a transformative chapter in his life. In his early 20s, Plato crossed paths with the enigmatic philosopher whose method of inquiry and commitment to truth left a lasting impression. Socrates, known for his unconventional approach and relentless questioning, became a mentor and guiding force for the young Plato. At the heart of Socrates' teaching was his belief in the pursuit of knowledge as a moral imperative. He challenged the conventional wisdom of Athens, engaging citizens in dialogues that exposed contradictions in their beliefs and practices. This method, later known as the Socratic method, involved probing questions aimed at uncovering underlying truths. For Plato, this approach resonated deeply, aligning with his own intellectual curiosity and dissatisfaction with superficial answers. Socrates did not write down his teachings, but his ideas lived on through the works of his disciples. Plato, in particular, became the most prominent preserver and interpreter of Socratic philosophy. Through dialogues such as Apology, Crito, and Euthyphro, Plato immortalized Socrates' voice, portraying his mentor as a paragon of wisdom and integrity. These writings reveal not only Socrates' philosophy but also Plato's evolving thought, as he began integrating his own ideas into their exchanges. Socrates' lifestyle and values deeply influenced Plato. He lived modestly, prioritizing the pursuit of virtue over material wealth or social status. This perspective struck a chord with Plato, who was born into privilege but had grown increasingly disillusioned with the political and social structures of Athens. Socrates' emphasis on ethics and justice offered a counterpoint to the corruption and power struggles that surrounded them. The relationship between Socrates and Plato was not merely intellectual. It was also deeply personal. Plato admired Socrates' courage and unwavering commitment to his principles, even in the face of hostility and persecution. Socrates' refusal to conform to societal norms and his willingness to challenge authority left an indelible mark on his young student. The impact of Socrates on Plato's philosophy is evident in his later works. Socratic themes of justice, virtue, and the examined life permeate Plato's dialogues, forming the bedrock of his intellectual legacy. However, Plato also began to depart from Socratic thought, developing his own theories and exploring questions that Socrates had left unanswered. This evolution was not a rejection of his mentor but a continuation of their shared quest for wisdom. The death of Socrates in 399 BCE was a defining moment for Plato. Accused of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, Socrates was sentenced to death by hemlock. Plato was present at the trial and witnessed his mentor's unwavering defense of his beliefs. This event not only solidified Plato's admiration for Socrates but also fueled his disillusionment with Athenian democracy. It was a turning point that steered Plato away from politics and deeper into philosophy. Meeting Socrates was a pivotal event in Plato's life. It introduced him to the power of philosophical inquiry and the pursuit of truth, setting him on a path that would define his legacy. Socrates' influence endured in Plato's work, shaping not only his ideas but also his commitment to preserving and expanding the philosophical tradition. Part 4. The Trial of Socrates. The trial and subsequent execution of Socrates in 399 BCE was a pivotal event in both Plato's life and the history of philosophy. Socrates was charged with impiety, introducing new gods, and corrupting the youth of Athens. These charges, seemingly driven by the political climate and the city's discomfort with Socrates' philosophy, led to his trial before a jury of 500 citizens. Socrates defended himself eloquently during the trial, rejecting the idea that he was a threat to Athenian society. Rather than beg for mercy or try to win favor with the jury, he famously argued that he had been guided by a divine inner voice, daimonion, which directed his philosophical pursuits. Socrates maintained that his aim was to encourage critical thinking and virtue, not to undermine the established order. His defense was not focused on avoiding punishment but on asserting his commitment to truth, justice, and the philosophical life. Plato was likely present at the trial, and the event would have deeply impacted him. Socrates' unwavering courage in the face of death was both inspiring and tragic for Plato. His teacher's refusal to compromise his principles, even when faced with a death sentence, reinforced Plato's admiration for Socrates and solidified his own philosophical path. For Plato, Socrates' trial also served as a powerful critique of Athenian democracy, which he had already begun to view with skepticism. The trial's outcome was a harsh reminder of the dangers of political power and the vulnerability of intellectual freedom. Socrates was found guilty by a narrow margin, and his sentence was death by drinking hemlock. His supporters, including Plato, were devastated by the verdict, as it represented not only the loss of a beloved teacher but also the suppression of critical thought in the public sphere. In the aftermath of the trial, Plato retreated from politics, disillusioned by the democratic system that had condemned Socrates to death. He saw the event as indicative of the flaws in Athenian governance, where personal biases, mob rule, and political expediency overshadowed reasoned judgment and justice. Plato's critique of democracy, rooted in his mentor's execution, would later become a central theme in his own writings, particularly in the Republic. Socrates' death also led Plato to a deeper exploration of the relationship between philosophy and politics. He began to question whether it was possible for true philosophers to thrive in a political system that valued power and popularity over wisdom and virtue. This question would guide much of his later work, as he sought to define the role of philosophers in society and their relationship to governance. The trial of Socrates was a defining moment in Plato's intellectual journey. It not only shaped his views on democracy and justice but also solidified his commitment to philosophy as the highest pursuit of human life. In the aftermath, Plato would dedicate himself to preserving Socrates' teachings and to advancing his own ideas about the ideal state, ethics, and the nature of reality. Socrates' trial and death cast a long shadow over Plato's philosophy. They deepened his conviction that philosophy must be separate from the corrupting influence of politics, and that true wisdom could only be found through intellectual inquiry and moral integrity. These lessons would guide Plato throughout his life and remain central to his philosophical legacy. Part 5. Plato's Early Writings. In the years following Socrates' death, Plato's thoughts began to take shape and crystallize into written works, many of which would define the trajectory of Western philosophy. His early writings were heavily influenced by the teachings and ideas of Socrates, and they served as a way for Plato to preserve his mentor's philosophy for future generations. These writings were also a means for Plato to explore the questions and themes that Socrates had introduced, particularly regarding ethics, virtue, and the nature of the soul. Plato's early dialogues, such as Apology, Crito, and Euthyphro, reflect the profound impact that Socrates had on him. In Apology, Plato presented a version of Socrates' defense at his trial, showcasing his teacher's unwavering commitment to his principles despite the risks involved. The dialogue is an enduring testament to Socrates' belief in the examined life, where one's actions must be in harmony with reason and virtue. In Crito, Plato explored the relationship between the individual and the state, presenting Socrates' argument that a just person must abide by the laws, even if those laws are unjustly applied to them. In Euthyphro, Plato continued his investigation into the nature of piety, a theme that Socrates had grappled with during his life. The dialogue centers on a conversation between Socrates and Euthyphro, a man who claims to know the essence of piety. Through their exchange, Plato probed the nature of divine command theory, questioning whether actions are morally right because they are commanded by the gods or because they are inherently good. These early dialogues demonstrate Plato's commitment to philosophical inquiry and his attempt to uncover the fundamental truths about human nature and morality. Although these early writings were deeply influenced by Socrates' philosophy, they also marked the beginning of Plato's own intellectual development. In the dialogues, Plato often used Socratic questioning as a method to challenge assumptions and push the limits of understanding. However, as his philosophical career progressed, Plato began to diverge from Socratic teachings and develop his own ideas, especially in areas like metaphysics, epistemology, and political philosophy. This shift would be most evident in his later works, such as the Republic and the Symposium, where his distinct philosophical voice began to emerge more clearly. One of the central themes in Plato's early writings was the importance of virtue and the moral life. Through Socrates, Plato explored the idea that true happiness can only be attained by living a life of virtue, one that is guided by wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. This notion of virtue was not only a central theme in the early dialogues, but would also form the foundation of Plato's later philosophical systems. The early dialogues also laid the groundwork for Plato's exploration of the soul, a theme that would become even more prominent in his later writings. In dialogues like Phaedo and Republic, Plato elaborated on his belief in the immortality of the soul and its journey toward knowledge and enlightenment. For Plato, the soul was the true essence of a person, and its development was central to understanding the nature of reality and the pursuit of the good life. Plato's early writings are crucial to understanding the evolution of his thought. They serve as both a tribute to Socrates and a platform for the development of his own philosophical ideas. Through these works, Plato set the stage for the systematic philosophy that would later distinguish him as one of the most influential thinkers in Western history. Part 6. The Formation of the Academy. By the early 380s BCE, Plato's ideas had matured, and he sought to create a lasting institution that would foster the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. After years of travel and intellectual exploration, Plato returned to Athens and founded the Academy, one of the most significant educational institutions in the ancient world. The Academy became a center for philosophical study, attracting students from across Greece and beyond. The Academy was not merely a school in the conventional sense but a place of intellectual engagement, where various disciplines, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and ethics, were explored in depth. Plato's vision for the Academy was to create a space where knowledge could be pursued freely, without the constraints of political pressure or societal norms. It was here that Plato would develop his more mature philosophical ideas, such as his theory of forms, his thoughts on political philosophy, and his exploration of the ideal state. Plato's Academy operated for nearly 900 years, surviving through various phases of Greek history, and influencing countless generations of thinkers. The school was located in a grove of olive trees near the Temple of Athena, which allowed students to engage with nature and engage in philosophical discussions without the distractions of city life. The Academy became a symbol of intellectual excellence and curiosity, a legacy that would last far beyond Plato's own time. The Academy attracted a diverse array of students, some of whom would go on to become prominent philosophers in their own right. Notable figures such as Aristotle, Plato's most famous pupil, studied at the academy and were influenced by Plato's teachings. Aristotle would later break with his teacher on several key points, but the foundation laid at the academy would shape his own philosophical endeavors. At the academy, Plato's teaching methods were distinct from those of Socrates. While Socrates employed direct dialogue and the Socratic method of questioning, Plato's academy placed a greater emphasis on systematic study and intellectual exploration. His lectures and discussions ranged from abstract metaphysical concepts to practical political theory, always aiming to uncover the underlying truths that govern the world. The academy's influence was profound, shaping the course of Western thought for centuries. Plato's approach to education, which emphasized critical thinking and the pursuit of universal truths, would inspire generations of philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists. It was within the walls of the academy that Plato developed many of his key philosophical concepts, including his theory of knowledge and the nature of reality. Plato's establishment of the academy also marked a shift in his philosophical focus. In his earlier works, Plato had primarily concerned himself with ethics, justice, and the nature of the soul. However, as his ideas evolved, he began to explore broader metaphysical and epistemological issues, such as the theory of forms and the nature of knowledge itself. The academy provided the ideal environment for these more abstract inquiries, where students could engage with these complex ideas and debate their implications. The establishment of the academy was not only a personal triumph for Plato, but also a monumental contribution to the intellectual life of the ancient world. It represented Plato's belief in the importance of philosophy and education, a legacy that would influence generations of scholars, thinkers, and leaders. Through the academy, Plato ensured that his ideas would live on, continuing to shape the intellectual landscape for centuries to come. Part 7. The Theory of Forms. One of the most influential and enduring contributions of Plato to philosophy is his theory of forms, which he began to develop in earnest after establishing the academy. The theory of forms proposes that the material world we perceive through our senses is only a shadow or imperfect reflection of a higher, more perfect reality. This realm of perfect, unchanging, and eternal forms, or ideas, is the true reality, while the physical world is merely an approximation of these ideal forms. Plato introduced the theory of forms as a way to explain how we can have knowledge of concepts like beauty, justice, or equality, even though these concepts do not have a concrete, tangible existence in the material world. For example, while there are many beautiful objects in the world, they all share in a common, abstract quality of beauty, which is a reflection of the perfect, unchanging form of beauty that exists in the higher realm. Similarly, concepts like justice or goodness exist in their ideal form, even if they are imperfectly embodied in the physical world. The forms, according to Plato, are not merely concepts in the human mind, but actual, objective entities that exist independently of human perception. They exist in a separate realm that can only be apprehended through reason and intellect, not through the senses. This distinction between the world of appearances and the world of forms was central to Plato's philosophy, and it led him to conclude that knowledge is not derived from sensory experience but from intellectual contemplation of the ideal forms. In Plato's Republic, the theory of forms plays a central role in his conception of the ideal state. Plato argues that just as the physical world is a reflection of the world of forms, so too must the state reflect the higher, eternal truths of justice, goodness, and wisdom. The philosopher kings, in Plato's ideal society, are those who have attained knowledge of the forms, particularly the form of the good, and are thus best equipped to rule with wisdom and justice. This idea reinforced his belief that the rulers of society should be those most knowledgeable in philosophy and the pursuit of truth. The theory of forms also had profound implications for Plato's views on knowledge and learning. For Plato, true knowledge is not about knowing particular instances or details in the physical world, but about understanding the eternal, unchanging forms that underpin those instances. Knowledge, in this sense, is not empirical but intellectual, gained through reason and dialectic rather than sensory perception. Plato's emphasis on the world of forms was his attempt to reconcile the existence of unchanging truths with the apparent fluidity and impermanence of the material world. Despite the immense influence of the theory of forms, it has also faced criticism and scrutiny over the centuries. Some philosophers, such as Aristotle, challenged Plato's idea of a separate realm of forms, arguing that the forms are not necessary to explain the qualities we perceive in objects. Aristotle instead proposed that the qualities we observe in the physical world are inherent to those objects, not abstract entities that exist independently. Nonetheless, the theory of forms remains a cornerstone of Plato's philosophical system, influencing a wide range of philosophical inquiries, from metaphysics to epistemology. It offers a way of understanding the relationship between the physical world and abstract concepts, and continues to spark debate and discussion to this day. For Plato, the forms were not just philosophical ideas, but the key to understanding the true nature of reality and the path to wisdom. Part 8. Plato's Political Philosophy. Plato's political philosophy, developed in his most famous work, The Republic, addresses the ideal structure of society and the nature of justice. In this dialogue, Plato explores the question of what constitutes a just society and how such a society can be achieved. His exploration of these ideas was shaped by his disillusionment with Athenian democracy, especially in light of Socrates' trial and execution. This context led Plato to question the efficacy and morality of democratic systems, which, in his view, often succumb to the whims of the masses rather than reason and wisdom. At the core of the Republic, Plato proposes a society governed by philosopher kings, wise rulers who have knowledge of the forms, particularly the form of the good. According to Plato, only those who have attained true wisdom through education and intellectual training are fit to govern. This idea stemmed from his belief that rulers should be virtuous and knowledgeable, not motivated by personal ambition or power, but by a commitment to the welfare of the state. The philosopher king, in Plato's ideal society, is someone who understands the eternal truths of justice and goodness, which enables them to govern justly. Plato's ideal state is structured around a rigid class system, where society is divided into three main groups: the rulers, philosopher kings, the auxiliaries, warriors, and the producers, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. Each class has a specific role to play in maintaining harmony and order within the state. The rulers, as the wisest and most virtuous, provide leadership. The auxiliaries protect the state, and the producers supply the material needs of society. This division of labor, according to Plato, is essential to the smooth functioning of society, as each class performs the role for which it is best suited. In the Republic, Plato also discusses the concept of justice in both the individual and the state. For Plato, justice is a state of harmony, where each part of the society and each part of the soul performs its proper function without interfering with the others. He draws an analogy between the state and the individual, suggesting that just as a well-ordered state requires each class to perform its role, a just individual is one whose soul is in balance, with reason ruling over spirit and appetite. In this way, Plato ties the moral order of the individual to the moral order of the state. However, Plato's political philosophy is not without its critics. Many later thinkers, especially in the tradition of liberal democracy, found Plato's vision of an authoritarian state troubling. The idea of philosopher kings ruling over a hierarchical society with rigid class divisions was seen as incompatible with the principles of individual freedom and equality. Furthermore, Plato's distrust of democracy, influenced by the execution of Socrates, led him to propose a system that many would later view as elitist and overly idealistic. Despite these criticisms, Plato's political philosophy has had a lasting impact on Western political thought. His concept of the philosopher king has been particularly influential in the development of ideas about leadership and governance, while his exploration of justice, the role of education, and the nature of the ideal state continue to be subjects of debate among philosophers and political theorists. Plato's reflections on politics also laid the groundwork for later thinkers like Aristotle, who would refine and criticize many of Plato's ideas. While Aristotle disagreed with Plato's theory of philosopher kings and his vision of the ideal state, the dialogue between these two philosophers contributed to the development of political philosophy in the Western tradition. Part 9. The influence of Plato's teacher, Socrates. Socrates' influence on Plato cannot be overstated. Socrates was both a mentor and a moral guide for Plato. Plato's philosophical journey began with Socratic questioning, which laid the foundation for his own thoughts on ethics, virtue, and knowledge. In fact, many of Plato's early dialogues are based on the life and teachings of Socrates, preserving the essence of his mentor's ideas for posterity. Socrates' commitment to the examined life and his willingness to challenge prevailing norms inspired Plato to engage in his own pursuit of truth and justice. Plato admired Socrates' focus on virtue, knowledge, and ethics, and he saw his teacher as the epitome of moral integrity. Socrates' defense at his trial, in which he argued that questioning and seeking wisdom were noble endeavors, left a lasting impression on Plato. This defense, where Socrates chose death over compromise, instilled in Plato a belief in the importance of intellectual integrity, even when faced with adversity. Plato viewed Socrates as the ideal philosopher, someone who could not be swayed by the forces of public opinion or fear of personal loss. Socrates also demonstrated the power of dialogue as a method of inquiry. His dialectical method of asking probing questions and encouraging his interlocutors to think deeply became the bedrock of Plato's own approach to philosophy. Although Plato's later works, such as the Republic, expanded on his own ideas, he never abandoned the method of Socratic questioning and the importance of critical reflection. Plato's dialogues are, in many ways, extensions of Socratic methods, using questions and answers to engage the reader in philosophical reasoning. Moreover, Socrates' skepticism about the material world and his belief in the supremacy of reason over sensory experience influenced Plato's development of the theory of forms. Socrates argued that true knowledge cannot be gained from mere observation of the physical world but must instead be pursued through rational reflection on abstract concepts. This skepticism about sensory knowledge was a key inspiration for Plato's belief that the material world is an imperfect reflection of the eternal forms, which could only be understood through reason. The relationship between Plato and Socrates was one of deep intellectual camaraderie, and it profoundly shaped Plato's own philosophical system. Even after Socrates' death, Plato continued to be guided by the lessons he had learned from his teacher. Socrates had demonstrated that philosophy was not merely an academic exercise, but a way of life, one that was committed to the search for truth, virtue, and the betterment of society. Though Socrates himself did not leave behind written works, Plato's dialogues ensured that his ideas would not be forgotten. Plato's decision to write down Socratic conversations preserved his mentor's legacy, providing a lasting framework for philosophical inquiry that would influence generations of thinkers across millennia. Socrates' death, though tragic, served to deepen Plato's commitment to philosophy and to passing on the ideas that would shape Western intellectual history. Part 10. The Philosophical Journey to the Theory of Knowledge. As Plato's ideas continued to evolve, his thinking began to intersect with questions about the nature of knowledge itself. In addition to his political and ethical inquiries, Plato delved deeply into the theory of knowledge, exploring how humans come to know anything at all. This area of his philosophy became crucial to understanding his broader metaphysical system, especially his theory of forms. For Plato, knowledge was not merely an empirical understanding of the physical world but an intellectual apprehension of eternal truths, which could only be accessed through reason and thought. In his work Theaetetus, Plato took on the question of what knowledge truly is. The dialogue explores different definitions of knowledge, debating whether it is perception, true belief, or justified true belief. Through Socratic questioning, Plato arrived at a conclusion that knowledge is not merely about sensory experience, but about grasping the forms, the perfect, unchanging realities that exist beyond the material world. This marked a turning point in Plato's development of epistemology, as he firmly separated the world of sensory perception from the world of intellectual knowledge. For Plato, knowledge was not subjective or relative, but objective and eternal. The physical world, in all its imperfection, could never provide true knowledge because it was in constant flux and change. Instead, knowledge came from intellectual insight into the eternal forms, which existed outside of time and space. The pursuit of knowledge, then, was the pursuit of understanding the underlying reality of the world, a task that could only be undertaken by those who were able to rise above the limitations of sensory perception. The difference between belief and knowledge was a key component of Plato's thinking. Belief, for Plato, was a form of mental assent to things that were either true or false but lacked the certainty and permanence of knowledge. Knowledge, on the other hand, was justified true belief that was grounded in reason, not in subjective opinions or changing appearances. Plato argued that most people live their lives under the illusion that they possess knowledge based on sensory information, when in reality they only possess belief. The philosopher, however, strives to transcend this belief and approach the eternal truths of the forms. In the Republic, Plato extended his theory of knowledge to the broader society, arguing that the philosopher kings, by virtue of their knowledge of the forms, would be the only ones capable of ruling justly. Ordinary citizens, who are caught up in the world of appearances, cannot possess the knowledge required to create a just society. Only those who have ascended to knowledge of the forms, especially the form of the good, are fit to lead. This idea reinforced Plato's belief in the importance of wisdom and intellectual rigor for the leadership of society. Plato's theory of knowledge also had a lasting impact on later philosophical thought, particularly in the areas of epistemology and metaphysics. His separation of knowledge from sensory perception would influence later philosophers, including his student Aristotle, as well as medieval and modern philosophers like René Descartes and Immanuel Kant. By raising the question of how we know what we know, Plato set the stage for centuries of philosophical inquiry into the nature of knowledge and the limits of human understanding. Part 11. Plato's impact on ethics and morality. Plato's contributions to ethics and morality are among his most enduring legacies. In his philosophical works, especially the Republic and Phaedo, Plato explored the nature of virtue, the soul, and the path to moral excellence. For Plato, ethics was not merely about following a set of rules or laws, but about understanding the deeper, eternal truths that guided human behavior. He believed that living a virtuous life was the key to achieving true happiness and fulfillment, and that virtue itself was tied to knowledge of the good. Central to Plato's ethical philosophy was the concept of the tripartite soul. In the Republic, Plato divides the soul into three parts: the rational part, which seeks truth and wisdom; the spirited part, which is concerned with honor and courage; and the appetitive part, which seeks physical pleasures and material satisfaction. For Plato, a just person is one whose soul is in harmony, with reason ruling over spirit and appetite. The virtuous individual is someone who has cultivated the wisdom to know what is good and the self-control to live in accordance with that knowledge. Plato's moral philosophy was also deeply connected to his metaphysical views, particularly his theory of forms. For Plato, the highest good, the form of the good, was the ultimate source of all virtue and knowledge. The form of the good was the most perfect and unchanging of all forms, and it illuminated the other forms, just as the sun illuminates the visible world. To know the good was to understand the very nature of virtue, justice, and morality, and it was the philosopher's task to seek this knowledge in order to live a morally upright life. In Phaedo, Plato also explored the relationship between the soul and the body, asserting that the soul was immortal and that true moral development could only be achieved by transcending the distractions and limitations of the physical world. According to Plato, the body and its desires were a hindrance to the soul's pursuit of wisdom and virtue. The philosopher, then, was one who sought to purify the soul through knowledge, self-discipline, and contemplation, detaching from bodily desires to focus on higher, spiritual pursuits. Plato's conception of morality was therefore closely linked to his metaphysical and epistemological views. He argued that living a moral life required understanding the higher realities of the forms and aligning one's actions with the knowledge of what is truly good. This view contrasted with more conventional ethical theories that focused on concrete actions or consequences, suggesting instead that morality is about striving toward eternal, objective truths. Plato's ethical teachings influenced countless generations of thinkers, both in antiquity and in the modern world. His ideas about virtue, justice, and the nature of the soul laid the groundwork for later philosophers, particularly in the fields of ethics, psychology, and political theory. His influence can be seen in the works of Aristotle, who built on Plato's ideas while also challenging some of them, as well as in the development of Christian ethical thought in the Middle Ages. In the centuries following Plato's death, his moral philosophy continued to shape debates about the nature of ethics, the role of reason in moral decision-making, and the relationship between the soul and the body. Even today, his exploration of virtue and the good remains a cornerstone of Western moral philosophy. Plato's ethical philosophy was not only concerned with how individuals could live good lives, but also with how society could be organized in such a way that it would promote justice and the common good. Part 12. The Academy and Plato's Legacy in Education. Plato's establishment of the Academy in Athens was one of his most significant contributions to the intellectual world. Founded around 387 BCE, the Academy became the first institution of higher learning in the Western world and served as a center for philosophical inquiry and debate for centuries. Plato's Academy attracted some of the brightest minds of the time, and it became the intellectual birthplace of numerous important philosophical and scientific ideas. The Academy was dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, particularly through dialogue and dialectical reasoning, and was crucial in shaping the development of Western philosophy. The Academy was distinctive in its focus on the pursuit of truth through rational thought and philosophical discourse. Unlike other educational institutions of the time, which were primarily concerned with practical knowledge and the training of citizens, Plato's Academy was dedicated to intellectual exploration, encouraging students to engage with abstract concepts such as justice, virtue, and the nature of existence. This focus on philosophy and intellectual development set the Academy apart from other schools and laid the foundation for the intellectual traditions that would follow. One of the most important figures associated with Plato's Academy was Aristotle, who studied there for 20 years. Aristotle's influence on Western thought was immense, and his work both built on and challenged many of Plato's ideas. While Aristotle disagreed with Plato on several key points, particularly regarding the theory of forms and the nature of reality, he nonetheless benefited from the rigorous intellectual environment fostered by Plato's Academy. The exchange of ideas between Plato and Aristotle, along with the contributions of many other scholars, made the Academy a beacon of learning in the ancient world. The influence of Plato's Academy extended far beyond its time. After Plato's death, his student Speusippus took over the leadership of the Academy, and it continued to flourish as a center of intellectual activity for centuries. The Academy's impact on the development of Western thought can be seen in its lasting influence on later schools of philosophy, particularly Neoplatonism and the Renaissance humanists, who sought to revive the study of Plato's ideas. In addition to its influence on philosophy, the Academy also played a role in the development of scientific thought. Plato's emphasis on reason and the pursuit of knowledge through intellectual exploration encouraged the development of early scientific theories, particularly in fields such as mathematics, astronomy, and biology. The Academy fostered a spirit of inquiry that led to breakthroughs in various disciplines, and many of Plato's followers contributed to the advancement of scientific knowledge. Plato's legacy in education is also evident in his approach to teaching, which emphasized critical thinking and intellectual independence. He believed that true education was not about memorizing facts, but about engaging with fundamental questions and developing the ability to think logically and critically. His method of dialectic, which involved questioning and dialogue, is still used in educational settings today, encouraging students to challenge assumptions and engage in thoughtful discussion. Plato's Academy continued to operate for nearly 1,000 years, until it was closed by the Roman Emperor Justinian in 529 CE. Despite its closure, the ideas and methods developed at the Academy lived on, influencing the intellectual climate of the Western world for centuries. Plato's impact on education and intellectual thought remains one of his greatest legacies, and his Academy is considered a symbol of the enduring value of philosophical inquiry and the pursuit of wisdom. Part 13. The enduring relevance of Plato's philosophy. Plato's philosophy remains relevant to this day, continuing to shape and inspire modern thought across multiple disciplines. His ideas on ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology have influenced countless generations of philosophers, scholars, and thinkers throughout history. The core principles of his thought, such as the theory of forms, the nature of justice, and the role of reason in human life, continue to provide a foundation for contemporary philosophical debates. In an age where technology and society evolve rapidly, Plato's emphasis on the pursuit of wisdom and the nature of reality remains a vital area of intellectual engagement. One of the reasons Plato's philosophy remains so relevant is its universal themes and timeless questions. His exploration of the ideal state, the nature of knowledge, and the problem of justice addresses fundamental issues that are still central to human experience today. How should societies be governed? What does it mean to live a just life? How can we know what is truly real? These questions continue to resonate, providing a bridge between ancient philosophy and contemporary issues. Plato's work encourages readers to critically examine the assumptions and values that shape their lives and societies. Plato's focus on the forms, or eternal, unchanging realities, challenges modern thinkers to question the nature of existence and the possibility of absolute knowledge. In a world dominated by sensory experience and relativism, Plato's belief in objective truths and his insistence on the possibility of rational knowledge remain provocative and compelling. Many modern philosophers and scientists, influenced by Plato's views, continue to grapple with the concept of objective reality and the limits of human perception. Plato's insistence that there is more to reality than what we can see and touch challenges us to consider the deeper, metaphysical dimensions of existence. Furthermore, Plato's ideas on ethics, especially his notion of the ideal, just life, continue to inform discussions in moral philosophy. His concept of virtue as the harmonious functioning of the soul, with reason ruling over spirit and appetite, presents a vision of moral excellence that remains appealing and inspiring for those seeking personal growth and social justice. The relationship between the individual and the state, a central theme in the Republic, has profound implications for contemporary political thought, especially in debates about the role of government, the nature of justice, and the importance of education in fostering moral character. Plato's influence can also be seen in modern psychological theories. His division of the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite has parallels in modern theories of the mind, particularly in the study of human motivation and behavior. The idea that the human soul is a complex, multifaceted entity that requires balance and harmony has been integrated into various forms of psychotherapy and self-help practices. Plato's exploration of the soul's nature continues to be an inspiration for those seeking to understand the depths of human psychology and behavior. In the field of education, Plato's pedagogical methods, particularly his emphasis on dialogue and the development of critical thinking, have been revived in modern classrooms and universities. His belief that education should cultivate wisdom, rather than merely impart facts, aligns with contemporary ideas about fostering independent thinkers and lifelong learners. The Socratic method, which Plato refined and passed down, remains a powerful tool in teaching, encouraging students to think for themselves, challenge assumptions, and engage deeply with philosophical questions. Plato's legacy, therefore, is not confined to the ancient world but is woven into the fabric of modern intellectual life. His work continues to provide insights into the nature of knowledge, ethics, politics, and the human soul, ensuring that his influence will be felt for centuries to come. Plato's philosophy remains an enduring source of inspiration, offering wisdom and guidance for those who seek to understand the complexities of the world and their place within it. Part 14. Plato's influence on Western thought and Christianity. Plato's influence on Western thought is profound and enduring, extending far beyond the realm of philosophy into the fields of theology, science, and literature. His ideas laid the groundwork for much of Western intellectual tradition, and his impact can be seen in the works of later philosophers, theologians, and scholars throughout history. One of the most significant areas where Plato's philosophy intersected with the development of Western thought was in early Christian theology. Early Christian thinkers, especially in the first few centuries CE, were deeply influenced by Plato's ideas, particularly regarding the nature of the soul, morality, and the pursuit of truth. Plato's view of the soul as an immortal, rational entity that seeks knowledge and virtue resonated with early Christian theologians who believed in the soul's eternal destiny. His metaphysical theories, especially his emphasis on the existence of an unchanging, perfect realm of forms, found parallels in Christian concepts of heaven, the divine, and the nature of God. In many ways, Plato's philosophy provided a framework for understanding the spiritual realm and the relationship between the physical and metaphysical worlds, which was central to early Christian thought. Plato's conception of the good, as the highest and most perfect reality, also had a profound impact on Christian ideas about God. In the Republic, Plato's form of the good serves as the ultimate principle of unity and perfection, and many early Christian thinkers saw parallels between this and the Christian concept of God as the supreme, all-knowing, and perfect being. Christian thinkers such as Augustine of Hippo were influenced by Plato's notion of the good, interpreting it as a metaphor for the Christian God and incorporating it into their own theological frameworks. Plato's ideas on the ideal state, especially the role of philosopher kings and the importance of wisdom in governance, also had an impact on Christian political thought. Some Christian thinkers viewed Plato's concept of the philosopher king as analogous to Christ's role as the ruler of the heavenly kingdom, a wise and just leader who guided humanity towards salvation. Plato's belief that those who had knowledge of the forms were best suited to rule found resonance in Christian ideas about divine wisdom and governance, particularly in the context of Christian monarchy and the divine right of kings. In addition to his influence on Christian theology, Plato's ideas also contributed to the development of Western science and mathematics. His emphasis on reason and intellectual inquiry was a key inspiration for later philosophers and scientists, including René Descartes, Isaac Newton, and Albert Einstein. Plato's mathematical theories, particularly his belief in the importance of mathematics as a tool for understanding the cosmos, influenced the development of modern science, particularly in the fields of geometry, astronomy, and physics. Plato's ideas also played a crucial role in the Renaissance revival of classical learning. During the Renaissance, Intellectuals sought to rediscover and revive the ancient wisdom of Greece and Rome, and Plato's philosophy became a cornerstone of this intellectual movement. Humanists such as Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola were instrumental in rediscovering Plato's works, translating them into Latin, and incorporating his ideas into their own philosophical and religious thought. This revival of Platonic ideas helped lay the foundation for the Renaissance's focus on humanism, reason, and the pursuit of knowledge. Plato's influence on Western thought and Christianity thus cannot be overstated. His ideas provided a philosophical foundation for Christian theology, particularly in the areas of the soul, morality, and divine perfection, and his emphasis on reason and intellectual inquiry influenced the development of modern science, political theory, and education. His legacy continues to shape the way we think about the nature of reality, the soul, and the pursuit of wisdom, and his ideas remain as relevant today as they were over 2 millennia ago. Part 15. Plato's enduring legacy in the modern world. Plato's influence on modern thought is profound and undeniable, shaping many areas of philosophy, politics, education, and even the sciences. Although his academy was closed in 529 CE, his ideas continued to be studied and revered, first by his students and later by the generations of thinkers who followed. Plato's vision of a society based on justice, his metaphysical theories, and his commitment to the life of the mind have all had lasting implications that still resonate today. His work has not only survived the test of time but continues to inspire new generations of scholars, philosophers, and even lay people seeking to understand the deeper questions of existence. In philosophy, Plato's theory of forms and his exploration of knowledge and reality continue to be pivotal areas of study. His belief in the existence of eternal, unchanging truths beyond the physical world challenges the modern emphasis on empirical knowledge and sensory experience. In a time when relativism and skepticism abound, Plato's assertion that knowledge can be certain and that truth exists beyond the material world remains a compelling and thought-provoking perspective. Philosophers, both contemporary and classical, still grapple with his ideas about the nature of reality, the existence of objective truths, and the limits of human knowledge. In ethics, Plato's ideas on virtue, justice, and the ideal life continue to influence moral philosophy. His conception of the soul as composed of reason, spirit, and appetite provides a framework for understanding human motivation and behavior that resonates in modern psychology. Plato's insistence on the harmony of the soul and the importance of rational control over one's desires remains relevant in discussions about mental health, personal growth, and the pursuit of happiness. His ethical philosophy has been adopted and adapted by various movements and thinkers throughout history, including the Stoics, Christian theologians, and modern moral philosophers. Plato's political philosophy also remains influential, especially his idea of philosopher kings and the role of wisdom in governance. Although his ideal state, as outlined in the Republic, may seem impractical, it raises important questions about leadership, justice, and the role of intellectuals in society. His work continues to inspire discussions about the relationship between knowledge and power, the nature of justice, and the ethical responsibilities of rulers and citizens in the modern world. Plato's ideas on political philosophy provide valuable insights into the functioning of modern democracies, especially when it comes to the balance of power and the importance of education in shaping virtuous citizens. In the realm of education, Plato's methods, particularly the Socratic method of inquiry, continue to be used as effective tools for critical thinking and debate. His emphasis on intellectual autonomy and the pursuit of wisdom remains a cornerstone of modern education, encouraging students to question assumptions, explore fundamental ideas, and engage deeply with the world around them. The academy he founded was the first institution of higher learning, and its emphasis on reason, dialogue, and the cultivation of wisdom remains a guiding principle for universities and academic institutions worldwide. Finally, Plato's legacy in science and mathematics cannot be overlooked. His belief in the importance of mathematics as the language of the cosmos laid the foundation for the scientific revolution that followed in the Renaissance. His influence can be seen in the work of many great scientists, including Galileo, Newton, and even Einstein, who all saw mathematics as a fundamental tool for understanding the universe. Plato's emphasis on rational thought and intellectual inquiry continues to inspire the scientific community to seek deeper truths about the world through logic, observation, and experimentation. In conclusion, Plato's enduring legacy is not just a matter of historical interest but a living, breathing influence that shapes the way we think about ethics, knowledge, politics, and the world around us. His philosophical system, with its emphasis on reason, justice, and the search for truth, continues to offer valuable insights into the complexities of the human condition. Plato's contributions to Western thought are immeasurable, and his ideas will undoubtedly continue to inspire and challenge future generations of thinkers and leaders. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.